All right, everyone. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to UOC B303. It's like playing Battleship. Designing for high availability in DR and Lync Server 2013. I'm your host, Mark Perez. I can't really see any of you. I did not realize that the lights would be this strong. I kind of feel like there's this sort of thing that takes place next. But I appreciate your attention. I know this is the end of a first day. Hopefully you guys have seen some incredible material already, had some inspiring speakers. I'm going to try my best here to give you guys a thorough overview of this product. Myself, I've come from consulting of 13 years, last 7 years with Microsoft, exclusively around unified communications. Hopefully I've got some insights, but the truth of the matter is I've got help here. There are a lot of really, really smart people in this room, way smarter than I am, but I'm here just because I'm better looking. As we begin, I want to start off with at least just an overview of the agenda and give you guys a sense of what the scope of our conversation will be. And then, of course, if time allows, we're going to have some Q&A here. But one thing we want to start off with is just an overview of terminology, right? So disaster recovery, high availability, those terms, usually we pretty much, we understand them. What we expect from a product, what we expect from a solution, right? But when we start to talk about things like resiliency or how those things are enabled, it seems sometimes that the terms get a little bit mixed up and they're a bit more fluid. So you'll find that one person has a great TechEd article that says, this is the definition of this word and this is that governing design principle. 6 months later, maybe there's something slightly different. We're going to talk about how these words are applied and these concepts are applied specifically to Lync Server 2013. We'll do an overview of high availability features. All right, so in that regard, what's new? How's it work at a high level? And then we're going to go deeper into what does it mean to actually design? What things do we have to be aware of so we can make good decisions when we begin to actually design our solution? We're going to take the same approach with disaster recovery. Here's the high level, and then we're going to try to get a little deeper under the hood. What are some of the mechanics taking place there? What applies, what doesn't? And some of the key takeaways are going to follow each section. And the goal of those takeaways is to make sure that you hear not just here's the feature, but here's a requirement, here's a nuance, here's a planning note to take. Now, because this is about planning, this is not a deep configuration guide. Now, if time permits, the demo gods are with me, or Scott, I'll be able to show you a little bit about how certain things get configured here. But this is supposed to be a conversation about design. So we're going to start with a product that has features. How do we enable them? How do we get to the place we want to be? So with that, we'll get going into terminology. Before I go too far, did that just change to you guys, or is that just in my head?
He's probably turned it down a bit.
All right.
You're good.
Yeah, I did have a lot of coffee, so I may start to speak in microbursts. So if you just need to put your hands, I'll follow the visual cues pretty well. I know it's not a game of charades. So we're going to talk a little bit about terminology right now. Resiliency. So according to the dictionary, resiliency is the Merriam-Webster dictionary to be specific. Right? Resiliency is defined as being capable of withstanding shock without permanent deformation or rupture. So in system speak, in IT, we're talking about the ability to provide and maintain some level of service, an acceptable level of service, amidst faults and challenges. So negative things are happening. How will this system that you have designed stand up? Now, perhaps this doesn't mean a lot to you. You're interested in what are the cool features that are simply enabled? What is the user experience like? And if that's a session that you're here or that you want to hear, this maybe isn't the session you want to be sitting through. Because what we want to talk about is how do you ensure that your system can stand up under adversity? It may not matter to you today, but the truth of the matter is in the last 7 years, I've seen that IT engineers, design engineers, either plan for resiliency in their solutions or in their resume. And as more and more services now become on-demand, cloud-hosted, where SLAs start to get higher and higher, the need for resiliency is something that becomes unavoidable. Now, resiliency itself is not a requirement. We're going to talk just very briefly. When you're working with a business organization, somebody's going to come to you and say, you're the smart guy, you know all about this product, we'd like to see a design, we'd like to get something from you. You're going to have to understand it's more than just a set of features, but it's really a concept, right? So there's a variety of services and functions that Lync Server 2013 enables, but how effective they are at meeting the business requirements is going to be up to you. Designs are driven by requirements. So very briefly, we'll take a look at a few of those requirements and some of the distinctions in how they're met. In Lync Server, we've got some functions and features that sound a lot like, maybe this is lecture age, sounds like high availability. And then we'll describe another function that's maybe a little bit new, and that'll sound a little bit more like disaster recovery, but it's part of HA. We'll talk a bit about how those all come together. Now, high availability specifically is about a level of redundancy that a system has to ensure a degree of performance. In other words, when you're designing and you're thinking about high availability, you're planning for near continuous service availability. That's a pretty spectacular goal, but it is something that the product group has taken, I think, great pains and made great efforts to try to achieve with the Lync 2013 solution. There was definitely progress in Lync 2010, what we could do to keep services on and available. And in Lync 2013, the technology is a little bit different, but the effect, I think, is much better, much more sound, and I think something that you'll appreciate understanding the inner workings of. Now, when we're in a design scenario, when you are looking at the Lync Server product, and you're in a situation where the BDMs, the technology, decision makers are giving you the business requirements, things you're going to hear are like uptime, that phrase, SLAs. These are the things that govern, that should make you think, this is about high availability, not necessarily perhaps disaster recovery. And you guys have all heard the number 9. And this is a table that many of you have probably seen. Here's what the 9s mean to you if you're not familiar with planning for high availability. And somebody says to you, I just need a solution that gives me 5 9s. The simple answer isn't no problem. Well, that is a simple answer. It's probably a very dangerous one, right? Because 5 9s get you about 5 minutes of downtime a year. Not a day, not a week, a month, a year. Now, I think I can be, especially when hyped up on coffee or those energy drink things that have the Surgeon General's warning on it, I can move pretty quickly. But it still takes me 5 minutes just to put down the drink I started, get to the keyboard, fire up the interface so I can start to analyze and look at a problem. So you need to understand what the 9s mean to you, set expectations early and often about what services can achieve 9s. So in the Lync solution, Lync 2010, there were certain types of design, a certain topology that we felt very confident we could tell you could get 3 9s of availability. So when you hear 4 9s or 5 9s for Lync Server 2013 as a request in a design session, you're going to have to do some very clear setting of expectations. Set them early, set them often, and make sure you can speak to what services have greater level of resiliency than others. Disaster recovery, this is an easy one. You've got the word recovery, so it means you've lost something. You've lost service. This could be for a variety of reasons, right? Creepy data center guy is in the data center leaning on a server, spills his Dr. Pepper, and you've lost a rack. And in that was perhaps your Lync pool, a set of Lync servers providing a variety of Lync services. That's
Am I playing role of creepy data center guy right now?
Not yet.
Okay.
So there's that possibility that takes place, and that might be a pool outage, if you will. Because it's within the data center, creepy guy, Dr. Pepper, doesn't go far, just down. Gravity always wins, and those servers are hosed. But there's another type of disaster, right? Asteroid 2004 C1A decides to park at your data center. Can't really plan for that. So when that takes place, service is down. That's a completely different type of disaster. That's one that's not going to be recoverable in just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. And so those are things that sometimes come into play when we're talking about disaster recovery. When you are in a planning session and people are asking about Lync services because they're so great and we love conferencing and we love video and all this instant stuff, and somebody uses the phrase RTO, RPO, you're going to have to define what those mean early on. Understand very briefly, RTO is about how long is it going to take for the service to come back. I'll tell you that as we get into the Lync 2013 solution, that time is looking pretty good. RPO, how much data did we lose? Now, I understand some people like RTO, RPO, I get it. Well, understanding and working with a recovery point objective is just part of avoiding the need for a career recovery objective, to be honest. These are things that we have to do. Nobody, regardless of how charming you are, if you deploy a Lync 2013 solution, which people love, but every so often it continues to provide disruptive service, and you're the person people call, you're not in a position to win friends and influence people, right? You want to get a solution that can provide great service and great uptime. Now, high availability. In Lync 2013, we take the approach that the Lync system is kind of a whole entity. But we've got some different parts at work that affect how we provide service resiliency or a level of high availability for services. I want you to imagine, if you will, you're at a picnic, you're outside, sitting at the picnic table, about to harden your arteries with some undercooked, overly greasy, summer muggy food. And you look down at the table, something's crawling on your hand, it's this big gross spider, you freak out and naturally do this thing, right? And I apologize, there are probably folks who have an affinity for arachnids, our hairy little friends. If that's you, no offense, whatever. It's a spider, it's a wasp, an angry swarm of ants, your ex, the ring of power. Pick your evil. The point is, you see something you don't like, your hand comes back, another hand swats away, and hopefully it's all taken care of. What happens in that moment is pretty spectacular and very fast. Not only is your hippocampus part of your brain firing at something like the equivalent of you running to the moon and back in like a minute or something like that. It's really, really fast, amazing stuff. But there's different systems taking place. Left side of your brain says, no, my right hand is going to make a defensive response, right? It's going to pull in close to my body. The other side of your brain says, no, I'm going to do the complete opposite. I'm going to make an offensive response. Even though this is now a moving target, it's all going to work faster. And you didn't stop and think about it. You didn't stop and look at the critter and say, wonder if he's had a bad day. Should I really swat him? Maybe I should get to know him first. None of those things take place. It's instinct. And it's the body's way to protect and avoid a need to heal. Well, these different compartments working together are doing completely different things in the body. So it is in Lync 2013. We take a look at two different components, if you will, the front end and the back end. How they address availability needs is now very different from each other. But collectively, it provides you a very reliable level of service. At the front end, we've got some technology that you've probably seen if you're familiar. Who here has been down the 2010 Lync server planning road before? Should have started there. Okay, let's do it the other way. Who here has never seen Lync server and done any sort of Lync server planning? So how is that possible? That half the people have and then the other half didn't have hands go up. I'm not sure about that, but that's okay. We're all friends here. So maybe I'm just too tired and there was a better way to ask that question. But in Lync 2010, if we had a pool of front-end servers, these are the servers that are providing conferencing services, presence, those sort of things. The users are connected here, and they're consuming these, quote, user services. We could have several of these servers put together behind a load balancer for some of the web SSL traffic, but for just basic core Lync client services, they could use DNS load balancing, and we could provide a level of availability. If one server kind of fell over, you'd have the ability for that server to either be drained or for users to connect to a different server. Not a ton has changed in 2013, except that we've enhanced how this happens. We've also made, and we'll get into that in the next slide, we've also enabled something that is pretty different from both performance, capacity, and availability. That second bullet under front end tells you that Lync Server 2013, the front ends now actually have a local instance of runtime data. So that RTC local database, that's a new thing. It's running on the front end, and it allows the front end to keep track of all this cool presence stuff. Now, some of you who've been familiar with Lync Server before, you went through a planning exercise of Lync 2010, you realized, hey, I want this number of front ends, but I can't have them. The limit, I guess, was 8. And people say, hey, why might this be the case? And a lot of this had to do with just the back end and how much we could expect with 80,000 users hitting a SQL database for real-time data. Presence changes here, join a meeting, everybody gets in a meeting at a conference all at once. Everybody's status changes because of Outlook invite that people don't even attend, for example. Those things drove performance hits at the back end. And so one of the ways that we're able to increase scale, but also resiliency here, is to bring some of that real-time data to the front end. So in Lync 2013 now, having 10 servers in a front-end pool, completely possible. We can go over that. We can do more. We've actually increased it by a third. What that does is it allows us to have that data local. But that is already a hint, right? If I'm not relying so much on the back end, that probably pays off somewhere down the road when it comes to a back-end failure, doesn't it? And the answer is yes, it does. We've also have an implementation in Lync Server 2013 of Windows Fabric and routing group logic. So that's a new concept. And basically, using Windows Fabric, we are creating a mesh between servers, Lync servers, and we're taking a data set, specifically user groups, and we'll look at that, and moving that data around to different servers. So that way, a Lync user not only has other servers they can go to, but other servers they can go to that already have their data. Huge advantage for the user experience. They can lose a server and reconnect in a much more seamless fashion. On the back end, we still have the notion, as in Lync 2010, that you could have more than one back-end server, right? We didn't support simply a single server. In Lync 2010, you could have two, clustered SQL with a shared storage in the back end. And that would be your resiliency for a back-end failure. So if one SQL node kind of went in the corner for a timeout, you could get to the other one. What we've done here in 2013 is we've actually enabled or built logic for SQL mirroring. This actually allows for shared data between two SQL instances, but not shared storage. So shared storage, maybe from a cost perspective, wasn't such a big deal for customers, but what we found is it was the single point of failure. You had two great servers, but if you had a problem at the storage level, everybody's hosed. And our intention was to move away from that. And then obviously, since the front ends are now doing that doing some local database data homing, that middle bullet comes into play. We have less of reliance on the back end now, so we can actually have a continuation of services in the event of a failure. So we can tolerate, specifically, for about 30 minutes. We can probably tolerate more, but we have some safeguards in place in Lync. If a back-end server has a failure and there's no back-end available at all to the Lync front ends, because they're running local databases, they can actually provide full user services before moving into resiliency mode. So that allows the back end to have its own recovery process, completely distinct from the front end, and your users have all their services. This is a diagram that hopefully depicts, if you will, what's happening there at the front end. In Lync, we have the concept of pools still, so we have multiple Lync servers together. These are front-end servers. And the bullets, the things I'm pointing out here are pretty consistent with what you just saw before, but I'm going to go in a little bit deeper detail about what happens at the logic level. So we've got Windows Fabric that's installed on each front end as part of the deployment process. This fabric creates a mesh, right? And that dotted line is supposed to represent that as long as we have these fabrics, here it's a ring, that's not really the concept, but the idea is that if we have this fabric shared between these Lync front ends, we can start to share data and have this data replicated. We can ensure that if there's data that's written, we can write multiple copies. Now, when users are provisioned to a Lync pool, they're assigned in 2013 to a routing group. And there's multiple routing groups per front end in a pool, but the simple thing to keep in mind is that when a user is placed in a routing group, that routing group's data is established with 3 replicas. So in this particular pool, the diagram on the right, we have 6 servers. We have 2 user groups. Actually, there's 3 user groups listed in there, only 2 because, I don't know, I guess the people were too wide and don't want to insult them, but we could only fit just 2 of the groups, apparently. And so the user group 1 up above is connected to a particular node. And the reality is that replicas will have, user groups will have a affinity for there'll be a primary replica, if you will. But there's multiple copies. There's multiple replicas. So we see that there's data for user group 1 on the front and the bottom right, and all the way in the corner on the top left. There's multiple ways for this user group to get data. And this is a real-time service. This is runtime. So Lync is actually able to handle a couple of things here. Now we're not just talking about what do we do if we've lost a front end. We're talking about how do we manage load? How do we manage a massive influx of data? What we're not data, but usage, what we weren't prepared for. This is a technology that allows us to do this. We also have now enabled the administrator to do a little bit more in the case of management, right? What do you do with 5 nines in 5 minutes? How do you patch a server, right? So you can have some difficult times there if you don't have a tool that gracefully and quickly gets users moved from one place to another without impact. And that's what we've established here. I had a customer probably almost 2 years ago who was new to Lync 2010. And we had, as part of the DNS thing, this ability to sort of drain a pool. And he was a domestic, so based in the U.S. They had a little bit of business overseas, not much that he could think of. And apparently, I didn't know this gentleman well, but apparently it was his intention to quickly patch his servers with some CU, one of our updates, and make his way to what turned out to be a Lord of the Rings marathon. And apparently, he noticed that there was still some usage on one of the front ends, and it was very, very small. And he just killed it because it didn't seem to be too big a problem. So that one server came down, handful of users, and then he went on, did his business, brought the server back up, went on his way. The reality was, one of the few users that was on there happened to be the CFO who was presenting in Dubai this big, life-changing deal for the company. And so, of course, when he came in the next day, his impatience, everyone from the Middle East to Middle Earth heard about it. And he had to face the music. And, of course, he looked to me later and said this was a problem with the product, which obviously not exactly the case. Maybe it is our bad that we don't have a best practice against patching servers while keeping up with the life and times of Frodo Baggins. But what we do have now is the ability for a server to come down and that user population to seamlessly and quickly get their services from another place in the pool. This is an incredible service. Now, we've got 3 copies of every routing group's data. So when we start to take a look at the next couple of slides, the number of servers should start to ring as a concern. We are going to have some strong recommendations about how you can have high availability. Again, sometimes in design, it's a little bit like the matrix, right? Some rules can be bent, others can be broken. There are a few rules that we'd like to, or a few bits of guidance we'd like to make sure are very clear, so you're aware that availability, that seamless, continuous service is possible. And so one of the things we recommend is that, as in this diagram, that there's at least 3 front ends. All right, so you have 3 copies now of this data, and this is a simple diagram to show what happens. A user is connected to their primary FE. They have 2 backups, and it's not just for that user. It is for that routing group that the user is a part of. Let's say that server fails, or the connection from server to back end, user to front end fails. The front end that is backup is able to communicate with the front end that's backup is able to communicate still with the back end and can assume the services for that user and that user's devices and the user group. All right, these are predetermined. There's logic in there that's governing how that routing group functions, so different users don't end up in different places by accident. And does enable us to have seamless failover within a pool without the loss of data. And this is failover from front end to front end, so that's still where we're at. So front ends now, in Lync Server 2013, can recover very quickly. And they can do this with some level of automation. So it doesn't require that you be there to drain a pool. It's not required that you be there to reconfigure the users. So we've addressed in many respects some of the challenges in availability for a high level of nines, right? We have problem recognition diminished. The pool recognizes, or the front end recognizes there's a problem. The pool is able to accommodate that. Speed and agility in mitigating an issue now also addressed as well. The Lync server is much, much faster about getting this user group reassigned and services restored. Now, this logic isn't just applied to routing groups. This logic for the user groups, that's what we call them routing groups, this logic also applies to the MCU factory services, conferencing, routing, lists, not the E911 one, but this one that works with the CDR archiving. So there's logic that will follow this mesh pattern around and we'll leverage Windows Fabric so that way these services are more available. So when a user fails over, not only their data now on another front end, the service that they want, the conference that they want is there as well. You want to add anything, or am I good to move on?
Good.
So you might be asking, well, what about Standard Edition? Just want to be real clear. All the great logic for routing groups, Windows Fabric implementation, it's solid, but it assumes there's more than one place to keep the data. So simply put, since Standard Edition is a single instance, for those who don't know, it's a single Lync server. It has its own database there. It did in Lync 2010 as well. It is a single box. If that box fails, there simply is no availability solution. We can address some Lync Standard Edition options in, say, disaster recovery. But for high availability, if you're designing for your organization or a customer, you need to step away from thinking, how can I make Standard Edition work? High availability is planned for, built into the product in a great way for Enterprise Edition. And we're going to take a look at the back end for a moment after I hydrate. A few things are new when it comes to high availability in the back end. For one thing, there's actually a sync agent, which ironically lives on the front end, that makes these lazy writes to the blob store in SQL. And is it 30 seconds?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so like every 30
frequently.
Yeah, pretty often. So the front end's taking each front end's taking its data that it has in its RTC local. It's making sure that any deltas, changes in data are being sent to SQL. And SQL, now we have these two SQL instances that are in a mirroring relationship. And so now we're using the synchronous replication. SQL is handling, making sure that data from one instance is getting to the other. It's kept up to date. And then we have this option now of a third instance, which can be configured as a witness. And this is a pretty critical piece, I think, for anyone who's going to stand behind their solution and say it is full, high availability, and great service resilience. Because with a third instance comes the ability for the backend to fail over in an automated fashion and to fail back. Without a third instance, so without the witness, it becomes a manual event. So in some respects, the front-end flexibility and resiliency is there. If you want end-to-end, you want that back-end story to be there so that way you can deal with this impact to SQL and still be able to provide service without having to get involved, without having to get that page in the middle of the night, or to be confident that services are online. A third instance where it's configured for the witness is our recommendation. And I don't really see another way to get automation out of the service for the back-end failure.
And again, that doesn't have to be the same. So if you're using SQL Standard or SQL Enterprise for the back-end, the witness doesn't have to be a Standard or Enterprise server. It can be. It can be a SQL Express instance that you have running. It can be a SQL server that's doing something else, right? The witness server is not doing a lot. It's literally just monitoring that server A is up, server B is up, okay, you're primary, you're witness, and then takes care of directing either one. So it's kind of like a traffic cop that all occurs at a SQL level. So if you're concerned about the additional expense of the witness, it really shouldn't be a huge factor.
Correct.
2008 R2 and SQL 2012, yeah.
I suspect we'll probably have a
And again, the mix there is that the primary, mirror, and witness all need to be running the same version. So they all need to be running either 2012 or 2008 R2. You can't mix and match those roles by version.
Some data here to give you a sense of what to expect from a high availability solution at the back end. So for Lync Server 2013, when we've got this notion of a third instance and we have the witness set up with the two nodes in the mirroring relationship, we can set a pretty, I think, aggressive RTO and RPO. We're talking about 5 minutes is something that we feel pretty confident with. But here's the reality. There's no data loss that we're expecting. Anybody know why? Why would we feel like we can lose some database activity, but on the back end and not expect data loss? Exactly. So because there's action at the front end and data at the front end, we have time now so that we can get the back end services back, up and running, make them available for the front ends, and then we can move on. Now, we say no data loss is anticipated. Obviously, we're not making this guarantee that no matter what, it will never happen. And I think the real no matter what comes down to when people have that window run that window very tight. So front ends will go into resiliency mode. In Lync 2010, when we had a back end failure or a pool failure for that matter, what would happen is the users would have a reduced functionality mode. Right? They're seeing some services, they're not seeing all of them. They can have some intra-site presence. They'd still be able to make a phone call, but a lot of their conferencing is gone. So in this particular case, since all the configuration data has been replicated to the front ends via Fabric, the back end now can quickly can come offline, and users are still able to access that service. They're not losing the data. So if they have some web content, a desktop sharing session where maybe there's a whiteboard for that conference, we'd expect that to be available. After 30 minutes, though, again, the front end will, if the back end does not come online, the front end will enter into resiliency mode. We don't want to live too long where we have more data, honestly, to rehydrate to the back end when service comes back online. So that's the limit that we set. But if we have a witness, this happens pretty quickly. Without a witness, honestly, it's up to you, right? How soon can you get there? How soon can you do the work to manage it, either with to affect the failover in Lync. Now, the user experience during a back-end server failure is what I just described. Little no interruption with a witness configured, resiliency mode without, and if both the principal and the mirror back-end, so we've got our two, the non-witness nodes, if you will, if both of them fail, you're in resiliency mode. And that's not in 30, that's at the 30-minute mark. It's not coming back until you're able to bring your services back online for the back-end. With these enhancements, we've now enabled the backends to recover services for the 30 minutes. We've enabled the automated failover and failback. We're relying less and less from availability on human recognition and response. What if you only have a single backend server? Can you do it? Will Topology Builder let you deploy a single backend node? Yeah. From an availability standpoint, our strong recommendation is that there's always two mirror nodes. We wouldn't consider a high availability solution one that just doesn't have that. Do you have a better way to say that, or?
No, I think that's a good way to put it. I think the other thing to remember is that there are a couple of services that still leverage that backend in real time. So response group service is one of them. Response group service doesn't leverage the RTC local database instance, and that's a good segue into Mark's next slide. So.
Right. So. Some of you have probably seen it. If you're familiar with 2010, we had a slide very similar to this, or a chart similar to this on TechNet describing here's the services that are available when we have availability resiliency in effect. In other words, what happens when the back end is not available? And so in resiliency mode, there were a lot more of these services that had an X. You did not get to have conferencing, right? You didn't have that ability to have a presence across, outside your immediate site and office. There are a lot of things here that were not available today. This is almost a full feature set, isn't it? The things that users are having when the service is 100% up and running is very similar to what they're having when the services have, say, on the back end, have come to their knees. And it gives you time to be able to respond to it. Now, as Scott was mentioning, there are elements that do not get covered by high availability. How we handle things like 911, how we handle certain bits and routing data. Those things are they're governed by other processes and other items as well, or other bits of hardware. We'll look at some of that. The same is true when we get into disaster recovery. Any questions on this before we move on?
Conference auto attendant, conference announcement service. Personal virtual assistant and group virtual assistant. Basically, the conference announcement services.
One thing that I noticed is that persistent chat is listed here. Now, persistent chat does have a different model for how it addresses availability and resiliency. And I'll mention that again when we get into when I get into disaster recovery. But just to be clear, persistent chat itself is not necessarily leveraging that fabric model and distributing that in a way like.
But it does leverage the SQL high availability on the back end, right? So if I have my persistent chat service pointed at a SQL instance, and that SQL instance is mirrored, persistent chat will leverage that.
There's a question over here.
Yeah. You mentioned that basically when you do lazy writes, the sync case you did the lazy writes to the back into the database. What about the fabric when it actually replicates that sync, the async, how quickly does that happen when you get up to the other front end?
So it's actually, when any copy of data is, when any bit of data is written, there's 3 copies written.
So it's not actually going back until it's been distributed.
Yeah, and it's not coming through the back end necessarily. The question was how are we managing the distinction between the sync service where the front ends are writing data to that lazy write of 30 seconds, to the back end, and how is that factoring into the fabric? And it's actually 2 different mechanisms. Sync is not necessarily writing that fabric.
No, so I think what Mark's slide here is trying to depict is if I have a Lync topology that has multiple front ends in it and multiple mirrored back ends, I get high availability of these services, okay? Response group, if I don't have multiple back ends, some of these other features will work in a highly available environment. So the back end can die, for example, and I can still have conferencing. But again, earlier he said that after 30 minutes, even conferencing will stop working when I lose connectivity to that back end. So that's kind of the distinction there for response group service.
Is there a technical limitation for supporting availability groups in SQL as opposed to mirroring?
Do you want me to take that one, Mark? Or do you want to take that one?
You go for it.
So his question, to repeat the question, is why did we choose to do SQL mirroring as opposed to SQL always on? Does that summarize your question pretty good? Right. Yeah. So think back to when our feature teams in Redmond sat down and said, okay, we need a backend availability solution for Lync 2013, right? It was, I don't know, when did we release Lync? 10, 11, 12. So October 11, 2012. The teams probably sat down 2 years ago, 2 years before that, so sometime in 2010, to figure out what the database availability backend solution should be. At the time, did we know that we were going to release this thing called SQL 2012 with always-on database availability? We might have had an inkling. We might have thought, yeah, that would be good. But could you imagine the uproar if we had said to every one of you, yeah, to deploy Lync 2013, you have to have a SQL 2012 backend, and the only high available solution we'll give you is a SQL always-on, right? Probably wouldn't have gone over very well. So at the time, the team needed to come up with a backend technology that would work across the current shipping version of SQL, SQL 2008 R2, and what we anticipated to be the next version of SQL, i.e. SQL 2012. And the only common technology across those two was database mirroring. Would we have liked to do something with SQL always on? Yes, but given that time, it was a decision that we had to make, and that database mirroring was the only one that really fit. I wouldn't say that it's really, I mean, think of like how we've integrated mirroring into Topology Builder. We've integrated it into commandlets in PowerShell, into Control Panel. This particular ask is not about something that we haven't tested, so we can't say we support it. We've taken mirroring features and embedded them into our management and administration tools. You could try and do SQL always on, but it would literally look just like a regular instance, right? So all the other, being able to get database mirroring state and failing over databases within SQL Server is not there. So I would say that it's a little bit different. Could you do it? I don't see why not. But again, we haven't tested that specifically. But then also we didn't really write it to that. So, there's a lot of advantages of using mirroring in the current version of Lync.
Yeah. Right. So I think the short answer.
You win.
Yeah. The short answer. That was another question about mirroring, and I think the short answer is that we have.
So just repeat the question so that.
Yeah. Didn't the SQL Server team announce that they're putting an end of life to SQL mirroring? And the answer is yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the story or the picture that Scott just tried to paint was simply one of we've got different product groups that are working very hard to be cutting edge and move things forward. And honestly, Lync product group was just not ready to just wait around for another version and hopefully get everything all settled in the SQL store. The reality is, by the time SQL's product group is done with one thing, they've got a great new feature as well. Yeah. But we've built logic around, so I think your first question was just simply, is there a technical limitation? I think the reality is that there's logic that's built in to make things work with the tools that we had available at that time. Yeah. And perhaps, future release of that story will be different. One of the things we're actually about to see, assuming my demo machine does not do this crazy blink of death over there, is what's it look like to actually configure this. We're not going to go through an entire demonstration of things failing over and you watching somebody who's green stay green, but we are going to just take a look at the fact that to these questions, we've built some of the functionality for configuring mirroring for SQL actually into the Lync control panel, making it easier for you to achieve this logic. So there was a lot of effort, I think, that went into getting us to where we are today with SQL mirroring.
And so, yes, the Lync team is aware of that statement, and they are aware of what they're going to be planning to do in the next version of Lync and how we get from mirroring that we have today to something else in the future. Exactly what that holds, I don't know right now, but it's definitely a known thing.
Right on. All right, so here's a question. How hard is it to configure all of this?
Not very.
Great. But you probably don't believe that. So what we're going to do is just take a quick look here at Topology Builder, assuming that this stays up as it should. Which button here do I?
There you go.
And it is still running. Excellent. All right, so not a problem with the Lync product. Lync product is great. My laptop? Maybe not. So here we're looking at topology, and I'll end with some encouragement for you to take advantage of the resources downstairs, hands-on labs, just to test if what I'm saying is actually true here, because you can configure many of the things that we're going to do right now downstairs in your spare time and see what's real, what's happening. Great idea. So if we look at a particular central site here in Topology Builder, on the left side, we've got two central sites. One of them's on-prem, the other's Rome. We get down to a particular pool, oddly called Redmond Pool 1. And on the right, we see that there's a SQL store. We see a SQL file store. We see the Lync share. We're actually seeing some web app references here. But if you look a little bit further below, under resiliency associated backup pool, we don't have one configured. We don't have any automated failover specified yet. Now, right now, we're still talking about high availability. So our attention is going to be with the fact that we do not have a mirrored SQL instance. So if I take this pool, right-click, edit properties for the pool. Now, again, this is not SQL tools I'm using, right? I'm here in Lync. We get down here to associations, and we see that there's a SQL store here, but we're not enabled for mirroring. I hit the checkbox very gently because my laptop would do something crazy if I was a bit too aggressive. Have the opportunity to specify a SQL instance. Now, obviously, the expectation is that this server exists. Lync control, the topology builder is very cool, but it doesn't actually go out and buy and install the software and the hardware for you, but it does quite a bit. All right, so SQL 2. Where am I?
So Mark's actually gone ahead and prepped SQL02.onprem.local. He's already pre-installed SQL, which is a requirement of you being able to do this. And he's used a named instance called RTC. So he's gone ahead and he's already installed SQL, or he's had a SQL admin do that for him.
Right, so the actual mirroring is not done yet. We're handling this here. I did have to specify the named instance, and I have to pay particular attention to the mirroring port number. But let's pretend that I don't. What would have happened just then? Well, when I come back here, you're going to notice that two things have changed in Topology Builder. One, we're seeing that I do have the same SQL store, but there is now a mirroring SQL store that Lync is aware of. So the topology is ready to publish this change in a sense. It's captured that, but it's also captured something here in shared components. There wasn't a red X there. Now there is. Red X's have, for many years at Microsoft, been bad, and so it is here. It's letting me know that, hey, I am not aware of this mirroring port number on the other node, on the other instance, excuse me. So what I have the opportunity to do, populate that here.
And you did that because the first time you set up SQL, it wasn't in a mirror, so Topology Builder allowed you to create it without a mirrored port. So it was a valid config before, and now it's an invalid config, right?
Exactly. And
Perfect.
so even though it's an invalid thing that would be, I don't want to say harmful, but it would be disruptive to SQL, Lync is giving you the guidance to say we need to have this configured as well on this other product. So again, a lot that's happening on the SQL that we're managing through Lync here. So at this point, I've got mirroring to a degree configured. Now, I would have to publish this, and I would have to do some work on our on the Lync deployment to actually do some service and component availability here. But before I publish this, I want to talk about DR, because while I'm in here, that didn't take very long. Now, before we move too far, though, I want to take a look at what else could I do from a disaster recovery standpoint. Because here at Topology Builder, we can also, while we're doing this very quick SQL mirroring, enable DR. And so, got it, right on. So DR, disaster recovery in Lync Server 2013. We cover two specific scenarios, pool failure and site failure. So in pool failure, one of the things that that's a scenario with the guy and the Dr. Pepper, you know, you're in data center, if you will. You have some opportunity to maybe use other servers, but no, the entire pool is down. Somehow you've lost the rack, the switch, whatever the case may be. But you have another pool nearby, or perhaps it is simply maintenance. You need to move users from pool A to pool B. They're in the same data center. Well, hey, pools can be paired. And that backup agent, there's a backup agent on a front end in a pool that writes deltas to a DFS share. We saw that Lync file share in Topology Builder. To affect disaster recovery for Lync 2013, we leverage DFS in such a way that the file share is replicated from one paired pool to the other. This is a very good thing because we don't want every front end in a Lync pool to send data across a network, if we get to, say, a site failure, for example, and flood your network with individual writes. So we have a server that's writing changes to a share, and a share that's replicated with the pool. The backup service actually handles some of this as well. We do have content that is able to be managed by the backup service. It is just one front end, right? I believe it's the first front end that actually comes online.
Yeah, it's one front end in the pool responsible for copying the content between the two pools.
Correct. And so that there's one in each, just to be clear about that. So there's a backup service there. Once two pools are paired, if this is pool A, pool B also has to have a backup service because we have this one-to-one relationship now in Lync Server 2013. So if pool A writes its data to the share, it's copied over to pool B. Well, pool B has to have an agent that's reading that data from the share, hydrating its own databases. That way, in the event of a pool failover, all the data is already there. And that's how the product is set to work. Obviously, the backup service on pool B is writing data to pool A. And so we've got this thing working together here between the two pools that keeps data up to date between two distinct pools.
No. Lync decides it. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
the question was if this was like a FSMA role, you could elect a front end, I guess was the question about which front end will manage this or be the backup service.
The only control you'd have over a server that you maybe didn't want to have that role anymore is to stop services on it, and then there would be an election occur. So why this is important is, if Mark's on pool A today and he uploads a piece of content, so he uploads a PowerPoint slide to the presentation, and his pool dies, and the administrator comes in and says, I'm going to fail over his entire pool to pool B. When Mark restarts his conference, and now he's using resources in pool B, he doesn't want to have to re-upload his content, okay? So when Mark's on pool A and he uploads a slide deck, he presents that slide deck. Pool A fails, administrator fails over the pool to the other side, Mark signs back in, his deck's already there, it's uploaded. And you can actually see that. If you watch your file shares between two pools, you can actually see that data being replicated between the two pools.
It's actually for that reason we try to keep we made an effort to ensure that there was only so much doing the replication, because you could imagine large pools, lots of usage, it's a lot of data coming across. So it's a server that's writing it to the share, and this is what's enabled probably some of the demos that you've seen, and or maybe some of the marketing material where actually somebody can have an active session, lose the pool, stay current, and keep the data that they were working with. Can have a common backup pool for more than one site. So I have 3 pools, is perhaps pool A, pool B, both of them back up to C. That is not possible in Lync 2013. It's a one-to-one relationship. So pool A is paired to B and vice versa. So that's the
yeah, essentially you need a 4th pool. So the only scenario where that's just slightly different is in the case where you have survivable branch appliances or survivable branch servers. So any one of 1 to M, SBAs or SBSs can actually be paired to a pool, right? So it's not like we have to have a separate pool to pair every SBA to. That would have been silly, right? So you can have multiple SBAs or SBSs paired to a pool. But yeah, it is a one-to-one direct pairing now.
Gotcha. And SBAs, just in case there's someone who doesn't know, survivable branch appliances. So we're talking about local offices. Users are able to connect their register there for
question there, and then back here. No, wait. This guy here first. You guys look alike, but not
and they're both
quite.
wearing a brown shirt.
I know, and glasses.
DFS is not required for this, but if you're using regular Windows file shares, I guess it mentions DFS up there. You're more specifically talking about a function of backup, so if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah, you can use a regular Windows file share, and the backup service will sync data between. It could be on a share sitting on someone's desk. It doesn't matter. And then question there.
The SBAs aren't aware of the pool pair, right? If the SBA is connected to pool A and you are pairing to pool B, you fail over pool B, the SBA would work with that, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's a known limitation right now that we've documented to say, essentially from an SBA perspective, you get what you had before. Yeah. And then back here.
I've heard some initial guys in folks that are saying that rather than doing the traditional enterprise edition front end and failover between that, there's no more guidance for pushing folks multiple sites to go for SBAs or SBSs and then failover between that, so kind of a more distributed model as opposed to a single very resilient HA enterprise edition. Which do you guys go for?
Well, so let's clear up one thing. So an SBA is literally just a registrar. There's no data on the SBA, right? So it's just a registrar. So that SBA leverages a highly available backend in some way. So to this gentleman's point over here, that SBA doesn't understand if SBA 1 is paired to Pool A and Pool A is failed over to Pool B, that SBA user no longer has presence, conferencing, all that good stuff, because that SBA doesn't understand that. So I would actually argue that you can't use that as a high available solution. Mark had alluded to this before with standard editions. So I have heard a lot of chatter about people saying, well, now that we have this pool pairing, we can fail over pools. Well, essentially, multiple standard editions paired together give me poor man's HADR. And I would argue that, yes, it would give you the DR, but it doesn't give you the HAP. So Mark mentioned that before. So it's paired standard edition servers is better than what it was in 2010. In my opinion, I still don't think that paired standard edition servers replaces a fully high available enterprise edition pool that's properly paired with another high available enterprise pool.
What's the user experience difference between like things failing on HA cluster versus DR replication between channels? Is it seamless to fail over?
Well, so the question was, is the user experience distinct when you have a high available solution or, say, paired standard edition servers? And this is a little bit why I went through that mundane, hey, there's terminology here, right? Because when we start talking about HA and we talk about DR, two things, they're very different. And from the point of Lync Server 2013, one of the things about disaster recovery is this pool pairing is great, and you invoke it. right? So I'm at pool A. I want to fail it over to pool B. What if I don't invoke that? Right. That's not highly available. That's a service is down until I take action. So yes, you can use, say, 2 standard edition servers or however many. They're paired just one-to-one, same as any Lync enterprise pool. However, that ability to self-heal and to have those services available to a degree, a spectacular degree of continuous, that's just not there. That's only high availability, and that's only when we've got front ends. Right, so he's asking a question about CMS, and it actually was going to get to that in a couple slides, but the short answer is yes. That's one of the reasons that disaster recovery and HA are actually different. So you do invoke a pool failover. One of the things you have to do is you move CMS. Now, it's a bit of a logical move because we are replicating data here, so that there's some data that's already there, but you do have to take some sort of action. Again, it's not when high availability, we lose server nodes. We've lost some instances, but we've not lost the service.
Why don't you continue on with your slides, because we're getting close on time.
Gotcha.
And if there's any other questions after, Mark and I can stick around here.
Yeah,
we can
absolutely.
go to the demo booth.
All right, so this is just a very simple diagram, but all I wanted to make sure was clear here, I stole this from Scott, actually, but I moved the arrow over because I wanted just to clarify how data is getting from one place to another. It's not front ends sending to all paired front ends, just in case, I've been in many situations where customers have their networking security team. They want to know, what are you doing? You're already introducing a bunch of media to my network. What is all this replication? How is all this stuff kept in sync, whether it's within the data center or beyond? So that was just to make sure I didn't forget to clarify that point. So we talked a little bit about pool pairing. And here's some planning guidance, if you will, or some things to keep in mind. It enables active-active for 2 properly sized pools within the same data center. So we're talking about in a data center, this is pool failover, right? This is the Dr. Pepper, right? These servers are both on. This is not the case where we have a pool, that is standby. It's not doing anything. It can actively serve users, but they have to be properly sized, right? So in our planning guidance, you assume that each pool is going to be able to hold the total capacity, and that's part of our recommendation when it comes to pool pairing. If you're going to do it, each pool has got to be able to handle the total capacity from both pool sets. We get real-time persistent data replication between the pools via the backup service. I think we've talked that one through. But failover and failback, to your question, are not automated. So huge distinction, because while I said in high availability, high availability is great, look at all these great enhancements, doesn't apply to standard edition. Standard edition can fully take advantage of pool pairing, but it's not automated. So when you plan for services using a standard edition solution, just keep in mind you're going to have to do some extra work to achieve any continuous level of service. We've got some best practices here about pairing front-end pools. We don't want to see paired pools in a data center that are not side by side, where essentially we've got pools that are paired together, and somebody's decided to put it very far away. There's some considerations that have to be taken into effect. There's from just latency to bandwidth, but we have not a requirement here, but a recommendation about how you place and how you elect for paired pools. Now, there's site resiliency, that's something different here, but we're talking about paired pools in data center. Regardless, we do have some recommendations about the combinations of paired pools, and this does apply to both in data center, a pool failure or a site failure. You pair like pools. So enterprise edition pools are paired with other enterprise edition pools. If you've got standard, that's great. Standard edition pools can be paired with standard edition pools. It's very tempting if you have a kind of disparate user load to say you're going to pair them in a different way. That's definitely not the route that we'd like to take. Physical pools can be paired only with other physical pools, and likewise virtual pools that you've got a great virtual host and you've got some spare hardware here. You think it'd be great to match it. There's some very good reasons. Feel free to come up and talk to us about that. It's a bit of a planning challenge, and very difficult for us to just in a very standard way say you are fully assured going from physical to virtual and back and forth, you could get the same level of service, right? Because we're talking about an entire user load from one pool coming to another of a completely different platform. In this case, from physical to virtual or vice versa. So the recommendation is you keep it the same. Let's see. That's probably what I wanted to hit there. Can you rock this one for a second?
Yeah, so from a backup registrar relationship, we really haven't changed that much from what we had in Lync 2010. An Enterprise Edition pool, when it's paired with another Enterprise Edition pool, you can configure backup registrar resiliency. That backup registrar resiliency kicks in automatically. So let's say you had front-end pool 1, and it was paired in a backup relationship with front-end pool 2, and all the front-end servers in one stopped functioning. Automatically, pool 2 will start to take registrations from users that were originally homed on pool 1. Even though we haven't done pool failover like Mark talked about, that automatic backup registrar resiliency is still in place. The only change here is that we have this one-to-one relationship. So you can't say A to B, B to C, C to A. It's A to B, B to A. Done. That's it. No other creative alternatives. Again, the only time this occurs is when I have an SBA. So SBA 1, SBA 2, SBA 3 can all go to pool 01. Yeah, question there?
Back to the standard edition thing. If two standard edition servers are backup registrars for each other, and that's an automatic pickup if one goes down, do you get all those services?
No. No, you get just registrar resiliency. Okay, so when you guys were asking before, is standard edition HA and DR all at the same time? No, it's not. The DR side of it looks very familiar because it's not automated. It's an administrative required function. You get registrar resiliency automatically, but you get no HA. So if you lost your standard edition server, they're done. They fail over. The only thing they're going to fail over to automatically is limited functionality mode, right? Whereas if I have an enterprise edition pool and I lose one front end, everyone's still happy, right? It's when I lose too many front ends that I can't maintain quorum, or I lose that entire pool that we would then be in that.
You can backup registrar would give you like presence and DB, and then you do the manual failover, and then you would get.
Then everything else lights up. Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's about all for that slide, I think.
Yep.
You want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think this question was already brought up, but we were trying to answer the question about what happens with Central Management Store, CMS, introduced in Lync 2010, and those who were familiar with it, they understood, hey, we have this need in 2010 if we wanted to do a pool failover. There are things you had to do to handle the presence of CMS. And still today, each Lync deployment includes one CMS. It's hosted by the back-end server of one of the front-end pools. And if the pool hosting CMS fails over, the CMS must be failed over as well. It's actually the first step. Now, you'll notice at the bottom, it says it's not necessary to fail back the CMS, and that's true. As long as CMS is available there somewhere within the Lync org, the two pools that are paired together can continue to function because the data has already been replicated in advance, right? So there's data back and forth, and honestly, when we decide to do the fail back, just because CMS is living in another pool doesn't mean that the pool that's being failed back can no longer service. It's not necessary. It can be done. It just isn't necessary. And I think I clarified earlier that when the administrator does fail over the CMS, they have to do so before actually failing over the pool.
And then there's also high availability of your CMS store as well. And we leverage the built-in high availability in SQL mirroring. So if pool 1 has two SQL backends, one primary, one mirror, we've already replicated that data to the mirrored store, and then if the pool is paired, we've also replicated it over to the other pool, which if it also has HA on the SQL backend, it's actually in both spots there as well. So.
Nope. I think that was it, what I wanted to do. There's
Did
a
you want
demo
to show
slide
the...
missing here. Yeah. So we've only got about 9 minutes here, so what I wanted to do was continue here in Topology Builder and just show you how some of this is configured. We took a look already at the SQL mirroring. Now, what's involved in pool pairing? So I do have another pool down below in Rome here, and if I take a look at the Redmond pool where we first made our changes, and again, I haven't published this to Topology Builder yet, but now we do see that we're associated. This pool is associated now with 2 SQL instances, and there is a mirroring relationship. It knows about that. It's got a file store defined. And resiliency, though, is still showing up. There is no associated backup pool. There's no automatic failover or failback for voice, for example. So if we were to go into the properties for this particular pool, we start to make some changes. Below General, there's a Resiliency tab or window. And now, very simple and also similar to 2010, but this is all happening, the mirroring, the SQL mirroring, and the pool pairing happening here in one console, right? So we're going to say we want to associate a backup pool. Lync already says, oh, great. Well, you've only got one, so your options are A or A. I take option A. I can even elect to have some automatic failover, and in a lab, I might adjust these times. In production, you've got some latitude here about what the failure detection rate would be like. But here we have the ability to set the pool pair.
So one thing to note about that is getting backup registrar resiliency is not always happening when you're pairing the pools. So you can actually pair the pools and not have backup registrar resiliency. So you need to make sure that you're configuring both pool pairing like Mark just did, and you're also turning on automated failover and failback for voice. Because if he didn't go and check that second box, we wouldn't have gotten that automated registrar resiliency as well.
Right, so if we're doing the pool pairing, where pool pairing is governing, and it's pretty cool if you think about this. There's a checkbox and a drop-down window. Which of these pools are you pairing to? And what Lync is going to do for you is, aside from just preparing the SQL mirroring relationship for those instances, it's going to ensure that it starts the backup services or sets up for the backup services to be started on each of those pools, so that way they can start that writing to the shares and the synchronization between the shares of those 2 pools. So that is a lot that's taken place here in Topology Builder. And then to Scott's clarification, we're enabling, obviously, the backup registrar effect. But here, we've made a few clicks. We've entered, I think, 2 FQDNs, right, or maybe 1 for the SQL when I was setting up the mirror. And at this point, I'd have the opportunity to publish the topology and make my changes to services on the front ends. Now, there's a couple of things I did see your question, but a couple things I just want to mention. When we start to make major changes to services, there are, and this is more configuration than a planning thing from a design standpoint, but it probably matters if you're moving forward with the design. A lot of the questions were about, how do I do more with less, if you will, right? How do we work with a couple of standard edition servers, or how do we maybe have just 2 front ends or something like that? And the reality is, when you start to use Topology Builder to add services, to add functions, specifically to add pools, or to start to pair pools, services have to be restarted at the pool level. Now, it's one thing to restart components and services at the front end, but if you've got a fewer set of servers, say you've got your fewer than 3 front ends in a pool, you end up doing a full pool reset. And Scott used a word earlier, you mentioned quorum, and that's just a reality that we want to have that third, not forget the SQL witness for a moment. Within Lync itself and the Lync servers, we want to have that third witness to break a tie, right? So we want to make sure that, hey, if there's any question about data between these 2 front ends, we've got this third element there, right? So for that's just another reason why we recommend that there be deployments of at least 3 front ends. If you start off with something less, It's not our recommendation for any high availability design. Can it be done? It can. When you do get to that point where you have to introduce more servers, you end up doing full pool resets, which is an impact certainly to uptime. At this point, I'd be able to publish the topology, and I would be able to restart some services. In this particular lab, my pool only has 2, not because I wouldn't love to have 3, but because my laptop would just overheat and die if I did.
More so than it did an hour ago.
Yeah, that was, it recovered. It showed some level of resiliency. Go for it. Well, we actually, do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, so I don't think we've actually published any specific number, but so imagine this scenario, okay? So imagine you take pool A and you put it in New Orleans, Louisiana, and you take pool B and you put it in Dublin, Ireland, okay? And all your users in the United States are connected to the pool in Louisiana. All your users in Europe are connected to the pool in Ireland. Cross-continent latency is pretty good. Say pool A dies. You fail over to pool B. You got 20,000 users in the United States now have latency of conferencing, voice services, all that stuff over to that pool in Dublin, Ireland. Would it work? Yes. Would it be ideal for the user experience? Probably not, right? So you want to make sure that, I think when he said no distance, the no distance doesn't mean, well, they have to be down the street from one another, but from a latency perspective, they have to meet all those sort of standard latency guidelines that we provide for voice services. So
right, we're talking about
less than 200 milliseconds for audio conversations, things like that.
Yeah, we're talking about in-region placement. That was a poorly worded line on my part. I'll try to fix that before it's posted. But you want to have, if your parent pool's outside of a data center for site resilience, you do want to have them be in region for that purpose. It's not topology builder will prohibit you. It knows something about, hey, I don't like that particular country or region. It doesn't know anything like that. But what simply happens is the user experience starts to, for real-time data, starts to be questionable, and it's quite a shift. Correct. Correct.
That's right.
Absolutely. You could fail it over if.
It beats. Yeah. So his point is.
Potentially.
His point is it better to have a slow service where my users in the U.S. are connected to Ireland than no service at all? Yes. I would argue that if you're that big and you have that many users, that you're still better off to have 2 pools. You probably have 2 data centers in North America anyways. You're better off to have your 2 pools there for your North American users, 2 pools for your European users.
Correct.
No,
Absolutely.
It's not a Lync technical restriction.
Correct. Yeah, control panel here. As you can see, I've picked Rome. It's not looking up a country code and saying, that's just really too far. None of that logic is there. You can configure those 2 pools to pair across great distances. The more, more and more now we see a lot of use on media, video, for example. Those are things that obviously do impact. So the service could be on, whether or not it's, quote, acceptable for the business. That'd be something, that's a business choice, right? So there was a white paper, was there not, about...
I don't... So I think if you go in and you look at our documentation right now about pool pairing, you're not going to see what we just talked about. It's not there yet. So. It's roughly based on that requirement, yeah. You want to wrap up?
Sure. Hey, we're down to the last minute, so I'm going to linger here. Scott will probably linger as well. If you have any questions, feel free to come up. Thank you for your time, and have a great week at TechEd.